acquisition was my number one goal. And then I had this big dream of purchasing my own condo in the middle of the city, and I fulfilled it in March of 2020 in Atlanta, Georgia. And I remember I renovated it, spent thousands of dollars on it. And a month later, I was sitting on my couch and this thought came in my head, well, now what? And I realized that all of this work and what I thought was going to bring me happiness and fulfillment only lasted about a month. And then I was in square one, still seeking for something that was missing. And back then, of course, I didn't know what was missing was God.
That's the voice of Megrelishvili, author and founder of Christian Professionals Network Worldwide. From a near-homeless situation in a dysfunctional family in Russia to professional success in the United States, Megrelishvili has found her greatest joy in her faith and in attending to the homeless. She has an incredible Christian testimonial to share, but even more incredible is the hope she gives us that there are solutions for countering homelessness. Anna is my guest in this episode of the Practical Faith Academy podcast, the last one in Season 4. I'm Cecil Taylor of Cecil Taylor Ministries, teaching Christians how to live a 7-day practical faith. Everything I do, whether blogs, books, or videos, is about taking our faith from Sunday into the rest of the week, applying scripture and faith to life situations. I'm also interested in children and parents, as I've written a book entitled Unison Parenting, the comprehensive guide to navigating Christian parenthood with one voice. You can find more about it in the podcast notes, as well as much more about my ministry and how it can help you. In the Practical Faith Academy podcast, I add other voices with other life experiences to understand how they put faith into practice. Please subscribe to my podcast according to your listening platform's instructions. I welcome your comments and your sharing of this podcast with others. Anna Megrelishvili is here to tell us more about her life, her service toward the homeless, and this idea of relational poverty. Anna, welcome to the Practical Faith Academy podcast.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. Such a pleasure to be here with you today.
One of the things I like to start out talking about is our 7-day practical faith. That's the theme of my ministry. And what does that phrase mean to you?
For me, it means that I'm not a Christian only on Sundays when I go to church, but I really live what I learn in the Bible. And so my whole being is fulfilling being the follower of Jesus. And so not shying away from, living my life the way that Jesus would want us to do, right? Trying to be better every day and letting everybody know that my faith is very, very important to me. So the way I describe it is, imagine if you are just falling in love with somebody, you want to tell everybody about it, right? That's the same way how I want to live my life and proclaim my love for Jesus.
I think that's wonderful. And the idea of whole being, I love that phrase, putting our whole being into that. You have an amazing backstory. Could you please explain some of your origin story and then how that's evolved into who you are and what you're doing today?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot of people get surprised when they meet me today and they learn what I do and who I am to find out that I actually was atheist most of my life. So I grew up in Eastern Europe in a pretty dysfunctional family. Just to give you an idea, to summarize it, like every single one of the 10 commandments was broken in my family. So yeah, every single one. So it's been really, really challenging just growing up. I have seen a lot of hunger and abuse and just dysfunctionality all around me. And then I knew that I wanted something different for my life. And so I put wealth acquisition as my number one priority. So I knew that in the United States, women had more rights, there's more opportunity. And so I did everything possible to get a scholarship to come to the US back in 2008. And so that's how I immigrated by myself on my own, full scholarship, got my business degree, then got my MBA, then started really building my corporate career. So I climbed that corporate ladder for over 10 years, really just acquisition was my number one goal. And then I had this big dream of purchasing my own condo in the middle of the city. And I fulfilled it in March of 2020 in Atlanta, Georgia. And I remember I renovated it, spent thousands of dollars on it. And a month later, I was sitting on my couch and this thought came in my head, well, now what? And I realized that all of this work and what I thought was going to bring me happiness and fulfillment only lasted about a month. And then I was in square one, still seeking for something that was missing. And back then, of course, I didn't know what was missing was God. I thought, okay, I need to figure out what's happening. Why do I feel this void? And I actually thought that the way I would do it is by going to therapy. So I started going to hypnotherapy, which helped a lot with different things. But I think the biggest thing that it did in one of the sessions, it had some sort of encounter with higher power. But back then, I didn't know really how to call it or what to make of it. But a few months later, I had this night when I was awakened at 3 a.m., wide awake. And I have never prayed in my life, but that night I just felt compelled to pray. And I prayed in the way that I knew how. And I said something like, God, if you exist, like, what is the purpose for my life? Why do I keep feeling this way? And I heard an audible voice in my room that said, go to the store, prepare food, feed the hungry. And of course, I was very freaked out, but the next day I didn't go to work. I actually took a day off and went and prepared 24 bags of lunches. And I went to feed the homeless that I've seen in downtown area of Atlanta. And so after about an hour, I came across a whole group of people hang out together. So I went over and I said, hey guys, have some lunch, gave them all out. And then one of the homeless ladies looked at me and she said, I have a gift for you. And I was like, okay. So then she's looking for this thing and all of her belongings were in this one big brown bag. And finally she pulls out this little bird made of clay. And I looked at it and it was a sparrow. And on its chest, it was written, now in God's hands. And that was the moment I had felt like this lightning struck me and I burst into tears, got in my car, and I just started sobbing. And the only phrase that I had repeating was, God is real. God is real. God is real. And I just knew that God was talking to me. And so I drove home and ordered my first Bible from Amazon and then started reading it cover to cover. And then eventually, started going to church. A year later, got baptized, and I'm expediting the whole story. But eventually, I quit my corporate job. I went on this year-long sabbatical, which is a story of its own. And then through the sabbatical, I started going on silent retreats. So I now have a practice of going on silent retreats to monasteries. And during my first retreat, I wrote my first book, Finding Courage to Change, in 2 days. So it felt like really just a divine download. And during my second retreat is when God showed me the vision of everything that I'm doing now with the work. And so I founded the Christian Professionals Network Worldwide. And so we'll get to that in a second, but that's kind of the very condensed version of the story of how I got here.
That is so inspirational, Anna, to hear that. And the fact that you were obedient when you didn't even really understand it. You still were obedient to what God was telling you. And that led you straight into his arms, right?
Yeah. Well, you know what I think? I think God always acts specifically to what a specific person needs. I think I was
Amen.
so hardened, and I needed some big gesture like that to awaken and get me out of that kind of race rat, run that I was constantly working more to earn more money, to buy more things, and suddenly there's this voice. And trust me, when you experience God, it is so powerful that even if you're not a believer, in your core. And I remember in the morning, I woke up and I was like, no, something happened last night. I didn't dream it. I could feel it. It was undeniable. And so you had no other choice but just to follow it.
Anna Megrelishvili is my guest here on the Practical Faith Academy podcast. And I'm going to go back a little bit to your time in Georgia, where you were growing up. And the fact that in that atheistic, commandment-breaking household, you were facing a lot of poverty and risk because of the way your family operated. And you got into a position where you were living with your aunt and you were nearly homeless. How has that experience I guess at first it motivated you towards wealth. Now it motivates you in a different way, I guess, right?
Yes, absolutely right. So, as you mentioned, my family is originally from Georgia in Eastern Europe, and we actually were immigrants in Russia for 10 years. And during that time, that was the hardest part because when you immigrate to a new country, you're really relationally poor. There's really no contacts, you have no relatives. And so relational poverty is actually the number one reason why people become homeless. My father has struggled with alcoholism and it gotten a lot worse while we were living in Russia. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. I was, I would say about 8, and my brother was maybe a year and a half. And so she had to take care of both of us. And my father would go on these binges, right? Drinking binges. He would leave us alone with no money, no food. I had to, as an 8-year-old, go outside to gather bottles to take to recycling plants. So as you imagine, like you experience a lot of shame as a little girl, right? You collect out of garbage. You pray that no classmate will see you while you do this. And so I remember I had some kids who were making fun of me while I do that. And that was the moment when I said, I am never going to be poor again. And that was when I kind of decided wealth acquisition is the number one reason why I should live my life. And that's what I'm going to do. And we gotten to the point where my father stopped paying rent. And so we had to start hiding from our landlord, which was very, very stressful because we had to have the special knock that my mom knew it was me coming from school. I had to always look if there's our landlord waiting for us. And then we eventually would have been homeless if not for my grandmother. So my grandmother ended up selling all of her gold jewelry, wealthy, anything that was worth something so that she could buy us train tickets. And she finally was like, you need to get out and come back to Georgia. At least here, I know that I can feed your kids. And so that's how we left Russia when I was 12 and we moved back to Georgia. And if not for my grandmother, we would have been homeless. And back then in Russia, there was there's no shelters. There's no community support like what we experience here in the US. If you're homeless, you're out in the street and you're begging and, there's no hope from the government that they're going to help you.
I latch on to this idea of relational poverty. You had a relationship that saved you from homelessness. There's a lot of homeless people, as you say, that do not have that relationship that saves them. I'm also thinking of situations that aren't necessarily a homeless situation, but are still desperate in a way. I know an elderly couple that is estranged from family, physically distant from other family. They're unable to get out much, access people online. They're starting to have cognitive issues that may lead to some other living situation, but it also exacerbates the problem now and so forth. And I look at them and I go, some of their options are limited because of this relational poverty. So how do you think that Christianity addresses relational poverty. What do we have to say as Christians about relationships and relational poverty?
So I think relational poverty has increased in the United States, and it's correlated with the decrease of attendance of church. So as a church, we're always called to be there as a community. Most churches, if somebody who is a member goes through a very significant financial distress, the church is there to make sure to catch them and to pray for them. And I think a lot of the times in our culture, we use prayer as the last resort when it should be the first. Prayer should be the first thing we do whenever we're going through hardships. And so having prayer warriors is so important. And relational poverty is getting worse in the United States. So I think last survey was actually done pre-pandemic. I would say it's probably worse after pandemic, but 1 in 5 Americans reported to feel lonely, isolated, really no close contacts. And so that's close to, I think, it was close to 20%. I think it was like 18 point something percent of people reported it. But there's a lot of economical, social, and spiritual things happening when people are relationally poor. So there is a lot of data, and there's different things that people survey. But let's say economically, they estimate about $9.5 billion gets lost in productivity because of people experiencing loneliness, because they feel down, depressed, maybe they're taking a day off, maybe taking antidepressants and so on. And health-wise, they basically equate feeling lonely and isolated to the same thing as smoking 10 cigarettes a day.
Wow.
Yeah.
That kind of impact physically on you.
Yes,
Wow.
yes, it's a serious thing, and that's why I want to talk about it, because it's a relatively new term. If you Google it, you probably won't find anything before 2018. And so, but it has such a significant impact on our society. And then moving to homelessness, there is a lot of stigma. When you think of homelessness, you think people are who either have mental health issue or some sort of substance abuse. And yes, that's a certain percentage of the homelessness, but that's not the leading cause for homelessness. Actually, the leading cause is the relational poverty. And so who does it affect? There's different data, but conservatively, we have 34 million of Americans right now living on poverty level. What that means, they live paycheck to paycheck, they have no savings. And so when something unexpected happens, loss of job, health issue, car breaks down, they don't have money to be able to take care of their bills. If they don't have family, friends, church community to help them, and they're completely relationally poor, they will most likely end up homeless. And keep in mind, there's 2 categories of homelessness. Most of us think of what's called seen chronic homelessness. And those are the people you see in the street who've been in the street for a long time. Yes, they have high percentage of substance abuse and mental health issues. In the state of Georgia, so I've studied the state of Georgia the most, that's where I'm located, that's only about 11% of the overall homelessness problem. So what you don't think about, that people who live in their cars, people who live in homeless shelters, and people who live in extended hotel stays, or maybe somebody's couch, they're still considered to be homeless because they don't have their own home. They're reliant on some sort of assistance. And so these are the people, most of the time, those families who have struggled economically, something happened, they don't have community around them, and they go to homelessness. And then I started looking at, well, why have we not solved this problem? And I think a lot of it is because we focus on the physical needs, which are very, very important, but we forget that they also need spiritual needs, and that's where the church needs to come in and support. And they also need the social circle around them. And that's when we, as Christians, can come and support them, whether it's through mentorship, friendship, any kind of just being there for them, praying for them.
I think that's an incredible analysis. You and I have talked a little bit about. I know it's very important in my family, and some things that have happened as far as supporting the homeless. And what I love what you've done is actually created this Christian Professionals Network worldwide. You mentioned it earlier, and one of its goals, at least, is to help homeless people. Could you talk a little bit about that program and that mentorship?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two parts to our organization, and both parts solve relational poverty. So one part is a networking. So I've learned that there is a need for Christian professionals to come together from people from different churches. So a lot of the times in your church, you're really not able to talk about business things, but you might want to, because we as Christians face all kinds of challenging decisions in business, and we sometimes have to make decisions differently than those who don't have faith. Well, we need that support system of people, if we have that kind of challenge, to come in and work together. So we meet several times a month with different events, workshops, just really anything, even our mastermind is about, well, part of our mastermind is talk about work and faith. So we always integrate faith into our work life. And so now we have this pool of Christian professionals, and each of us has a sphere of influence. And now we're collectively magnifying it because we're coming together. Now I'm able to let them know, hey, do you want to serve your community? This is the ways that you can. And so we recruit Christian professionals to become a mentor for the homeless. And the way that it works is you meet once a week for 1 hour, and it's really just sit with them, have a meal together, talk, let them make sure they know that there's somebody who cares about them. When there's a survey of majority homeless, when asked, do you have an emergency contact? They have zero emergency contact. I've talked to some people who've experienced homeless and got out, and I asked them, what was the biggest thing that you've craved and missed? And they said, I always felt like if something were to happen to me and I were to die, nobody would care. Nobody would know who I am, and I would be just a nobody. But we know we each are created in God's image, and we are so important to God. Why should anybody feel this way, that if I die, nobody would know, nobody would care, and nobody would check on me? Even having that for them, knowing that there is a person that for some reason, if I don't show up 1 week, somebody's going to say, hey, why is so-and-so not here for dinner? Let me check, let me call, let me find out what's going on. We don't realize what a big impact we have. And a lot of people return to homelessness. So recidivism rate could be between 30 to 70%. Within 5 years, people return to homelessness. Why? Because they've created a community. Even if they live under the bridge, you take them out of the community, you give them a nice home. But if you don't create a community around them, well, guess what? They're going to return back to what they know, because at least they have the community there, even if they're living under the bridge. So if we want to spend all this effort, money, to really get them out of the poverty and get them, safe in the house, we also need to care about their community and also about their spiritual. Just imagine if, we didn't have Jesus as our foundation, we would view ourselves differently, how we work differently. They need to know that God cares, that work is important, work is godly, and that, they're loved by God. And so it's faith plus community is really the long-term sustainable way out of poverty and homelessness.
I really resonate with that as someone who went through joblessness deep into my career, actually. And I went through a program where you had a mentor who could help you with your ideas of, what job can I get, that kind of thing. And I always advise people to go to this program. And I said, that mentor may not solve your problem for you, but they give you hope because you have that relationship. They give you ideas. Even if their ideas don't work out, you always feel like you have hope. And you were talking really about people who have gotten to the end of hope and how that's affected them.
Mm-hmm.
So, Anna, I'm wondering, how has your own faith changed while serving others?
I think before I served, more like a triage serving. Let me go clean up the yard or serve food. And it's this one-time thing that would make me
Mm-hmm.
feel better.
Mm-hmm.
It was more about how I felt versus the impact I had on other people. But I really started studying how Jesus was. He didn't just feed people. He spent time with them. He taught them. He suffered with them. So he was really present through all of it. He wasn't just fulfilling their physical needs. He was also fulfilling their spiritual needs and their emotional needs. And so since then, I look at service a little bit differently. And I think triage helping sometimes does more bad than good. I think sometimes we take, instead of teaching them, or we're just handing them things readily, whoever we're helping. And sometimes that takes their power away. I think we need to enable people to solve their own problems and just be by their sides and empower them and encourage them and give them hope that, yes, you can do it. You are the master of your life. So you need to know God and you need to take responsibility over your life, 100% of it. Everybody's responsible for your own life. You don't need to be solving, somebody else's problems. You need to help them to realize how they need to solve it themselves. And so I think faith has enabled me to really look down deeper inside of me and have honest conversation of my true why I do things that I do. Because sometimes you can do things because it makes you feel better. Like, yay, look at me. I'm so good. I'm such a great Christian. But if that's the case, is that truly coming from your heart and with good intentions, or is it just to make yourself feel better?
I think that's a great answer and a great observation. I feel like also I've done anything that makes it feel good for me. And that could be anything. It could be service, it could be pursuit of whatever. And when something authentic comes in, whether it's in a relationship or somebody giving you a sincere compliment or whatever it is, when something's authentic, it just blows away the superficial, is what I find.
Yes.
It makes a huge difference. So I know you're a relatively new Christian, Anna.
Yes.
I think you have a lot to say to all of us, even lifelong Christians. What is the hardest part you find about putting faith into practice?
I think, before I was a Christian, I felt like for people who are Christian, they used it as a crutch. Like, oh, they're just like, but now being on the other side, I understand that's actually a lot more challenging to live your life truly authentically Christian versus when you're not. Because I always need to be a better person and react the way that, what would Jesus do, right? Like that's what the question we have to ask ourselves. And sometimes it's challenging, you especially when you're going through things like betrayal. You want to respond in anger, but we know that we have to forgive, and it's hard, and we're humans, and we're challenged. And so I always feel like I'm not doing enough. I always beat myself up, like, oh, I could have responded better, or, I feel guilty about something that I said. I was like, oh, that was not very, faith-like for me to do that. And so it's a constant struggle every day to be a better person. I really I don't know where I read it, but, when you become a Christian, you don't become sinless, but you sin less. And so that's what I think about is that, I really try to sanctify myself every day a little bit more to become a better person. And I really can feel the change in me, and a lot of people who've known me have seen it too, the growth. I became more patient and loving. I used to people don't believe it, but I used to be annoyed by people. I really disliked people. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was like, people are just weird, annoying. And now I'm just like, people, I see the souls, right? That we're all God's children. And so you need to see soul. It's like, we are like this dirty kitchen. And you need to start cleaning the kitchen for you to see the shine that it deserves. And that's the original is really truly our soul, right? When we're born, when we just, drew our first breath, we haven't done anything bad just yet. We haven't sinned just yet. And that's, I think, why when we see, children born, they're just so like full of love. We see their souls more. And then this, dirtiness of the world just gets on us. And so what we can do is just clean our soul a little bit at a time to try to get back to that original state as much as we can in this lifetime.
Well, and I love that analogy with the dirty kitchen. And really, the way to clean it a lot of times is to let God clean it. I have to go on a regular basis for forgiveness and cleansing and that sort of thing. And just to say, today wasn't a very good day. I need you to reboot me, if you will, clean me up. But one thing I like in there, and I want to point this out to the listeners as well, because it's something my wife and I were even talking about recently, is that idea how you're seeing the patience in you grow, the love in you grow. And what that is the fruit of the Spirit, right? The Holy Spirit working and us listening. And so I like to say, we don't become more patient by gritting our teeth and saying, I'm going to be patient today. That's not how it works. If we get closer to the Spirit, we become more patient through the growth of that fruit of the Spirit in us. And so I believe that's what you're experiencing right now. And I encourage and applaud that. And I hope that we all take from it that when we get closer to God, when we get closer to the Holy Spirit, then we're going to experience those things.
Yeah.
Well, what is your best tip for developing and maintaining a 7-day practical faith?
It's little habits that you need to establish. I think a lot of us talk about, spending our morning hours with the Lord and the Bible and the prayer, and that's 100% true. But that's you and God privately. What do you do publicly to also let people know that you have faith? So there's different things that, you can do. Like we're on Zoom all the time. But one of the things you can do if you have a wall behind you is put something that's from the Bible. Some sort of quote, right? That's a piece of art. And that lets whoever you're talking to know what your faith is, right? It's every day. I think a lot of us get scared to tell people in the work environment, hey, I'm going to be praying for you, if we don't know whether they're Christian or not. But the thing is, like, if this is such a part of me, and that's what I'm called to do because I heard somebody is going through a difficult time. Why would I not let them know? That's part of me letting them know that I love them and I want to, take care of their spiritual needs the way I can. And that's through prayer. You would be surprised how many people just positively react. And I've even had a situation. So I obviously was atheist for most of my life. And I had friends who were not believers either. So one of the friends that I had was a gay man. When I became a Christian, we still maintain contact because to me, it's like, I'm his only Christian friend now. So I need to stay in touch with him. So the interesting thing happened. He was completely atheist. He didn't even believe there was anything after death. And then he had unexpected death in his family. I was the first person he called, even though I was not his family related. And he wanted to he wanted to hear from me what we would tell each other as Christians, right? The soul doesn't die, the soul everlasting. We can pray for them. All the things that we say, he was craving to hear from me. So I'm bringing this story just to point out, you never know what effect you're going to have on people down the road, even if they're not believers, even if they completely contradict what you believe in. if you keep showing them the love of Christ, they still will see Jesus through you, and somehow, some way, they might come back in the story. And again, maybe I had no effect on him, but look at how interesting it is that even though he was not a believer, he sought solace from somebody who was a follower of Jesus.
That is so beautiful. It's very touching to hear, and I think it's so accurate. I also find it interesting that you benefited so much from these retreats and going away, but it's the little things that are your best tips. It's not, oh, you have to go do this big retreat. It's how do you embed it every day in your life?
Absolutely. Yeah, because I think a lot of people get intimidated with the retreats. But the thing is, I think every Christian has to do it at least once in their lifetime, because that's what Jesus did when he went away in the wilderness on his own in prayer. As followers of Jesus, we need to experience that as well. It's been part of my practice. But I understand that a lot of people maybe cannot take so much time off from their families to be away. But I think everybody can do, if you plan in advance, at least one silent retreat to be with God. It's unbelievable experience. I can do a whole podcast just on that, experience that in very powerful ways at those silent retreats.
Maybe I'll have to have you come back on sometime and tell us about that. That would be great. Anna Megrelishvili has been our guest today. And Anna, I can tell from being with you that whatever you do in life, and maybe it started from some bad beginnings, but you put everything into it. And I'm grateful that you're a Christian and that you're doing what you're doing through the Christian Professionals Network worldwide. And I'd like you to talk just a little bit about that for our listeners, if there's any way they can participate or know how to get involved in what your movement is there.
Yeah, absolutely. So our vision is really to start opening chapters in different cities. So we're currently even looking for people who are interested in partnering, and as we want local partners to start up the chapter, because we really believe that there's a need for a worldwide Christian organization that brings professionals together, but also serves as light in the community through all the philanthropic aspirations that we have, including our mentorship program for the homeless. So if that's something that interests you, the easiest way to connect is to go on our website. It's cpnworldwide.com. And, there's a way you can just connect with us, and I'll definitely reach out. No message will be ignored.
Great. Thank you again so much for blessing us today with your presence, and God bless your work through that network. And thanks again for being with us.
Thank you so much. Yes. And another thing, always keep us in your prayers, because as you know, when you build God's kingdom, there's always going to be spiritual attack on it. So protection prayers will be always encouraged.
Last episode, I promised you a fantastic guest this time, and Anna was certainly that. I appreciate Anna's comments today and pray for her organization to flourish as it expands and creates relationships. Please check it out at cpnworldwide.com and see if you can start a chapter in your area. You can get notified if you will subscribe to this podcast on the platform you're using. If you enjoyed Anna's visit today, I feel you will enjoy this podcast format and the other voices who join me. So please subscribe and listen to this twice-a-month podcast. As I mentioned at the outset, this is the end of Season 4. Season 5 starts in the first part of May with Amy Chastain, who will help us understand faith through the paradigm of caregiving. Odds are that you will be a caregiver at some point in your life, and Amy has important ideas for caregivers and just as many about how our faith journeys and caregiving intersect. Before you go, I'd love for you to read 31 of the most popular devotions and essays from my years of blogging and social media posting. They're bundled into a free gift from Cecil Taylor Ministries, a mini book called Collections Volume 1. Check the show notes for details on receiving the gift and staying in touch with my overall 7-day practical faith ministry. Until next time, remember, God sends you into the world every day.